Welcome to the Birth Boot Camp podcast, your trusted guide on your journey through pregnancy, birth, and beyond. I'm Hollie, your host, along with Cheryl, Megan, and Liana that make up the Birth Boot Camp headquarters team. Together, we are here to explore the amazing world of childbirth and family wellness. Each week, we'll dive into empowering conversations with expert guests and share practical insights and heartfelt stories to support you on your unique path to parenthood. Whether you're expecting your first baby, you're a seasoned doula or childbirth educator, or simply curious about the miracle of birth, you're in the right place. Together, we'll celebrate the beauty of birth, honor the strength of motherhood, and embrace the joy of new beginnings. So sit back, relax, and join us on the Birth Boot Camp podcast, where every birth is amazing, every family is supported, and every story matters. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's episode. I'm Hollie, the CEO.
I'm Liana, the administrator.
And I'm Megan, the head of marketing.
And in today's episode, we are going to be talking all about pushing. I'm excited to talk about this because I think a lot of people are surprised that we can talk about this topic for quite a while.
All the time.
A lot of people are surprised that we have almost a whole entire class in our comprehensive class just about pushing. And I think movies and TV makes it look like it's super, kind of fast and crazy. But this is something that can take a while. And there can be, I think there's oftentimes more involved than people realize. And so the pushing stage of labor is actually the second stage. All of your laboring, getting to 10 centimeters, that's the first stage. And then you have the second stage of labor, which is pushing. And then the third stage of labor is after baby's born, and the placenta is delivered. So let's dive in. I want to hear from you guys though. I think that there's kind of you either love it or you hate it, for pushing. I've been both. I remember with my first thinking oh, this is hard. This is a lot of work. But then after that, with my others, I was okay, this isn't that bad. What about you guys?
Yeah, I would agree with that. So my first was probably my longest pushing, and it wasn't terribly long. It was 30 minutes, but I just remember thinking I could remember all the stages. I could kind of be in the moment, in the process, and the ring of fire and all of those things. I felt those things. And so I kind of liked that I could recognize all of the signs throughout the way. And then my other babies came so fast when it came to pushing that it was too much all at once that I couldn't really remember all of those specific individual times. So yeah, I liked it. And sometimes it was just too fast and it wasn't, it wasn't as memorable, I guess I could say.
Mm-hmm.
I loved pushing. I felt like suddenly I was a participant and I was able to actually do something. And also, it's the final stretch. It's the final sprint on this marathon of labor. And I'm let's do that. I get a whole new rush of energy when it's time to push. Cause it's finally we can push. And like you, Megan, I have shorter pushing times. So that's probably part of it. Why I enjoy it so much is because it doesn't drag on. So yeah, even my first was less than 20 minutes. So that giant cranium of my first was not fun.
Yep.
Could have slowed down, but that's these things happen.
Yeah. I'm always really impressed when I have clients who their midwife are always okay, I just want you to breathe through this and slow down. And they do, because I don't ever feel like I was yep, I'm slowing this train down. I got this. It was full force. It's coming, babies on their way. And that, there's so many variations of the pushing. It can be really fast, or, we can be looking at 3 or 4 hours. So it really just kind of depends on baby and position and all the things, which we're going to talk about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just think it's interesting that some people love it for exactly what you said, Liana. They feel like they finally get to do something, because they feel in labor, they've just, it's like you're active, but at the same time, like your job is you're focusing on like the relaxation and things like that. Whereas with pushing, you actually get to do something. And so a lot of moms do, they feel that way, but then there is kind of a good group of moms that are like, yeah, no, I could do without the pushing. So, but yeah, I think,
so I totally see that.
yeah, it's super intense. So I think it's so important for people to realize that like there are such huge variations in pushing. Because like I've seen it last a contraction, and I've seen it last 4 hours was the longest that I've seen it. That's a big variation in time. But I think they say your average mom, first time mom, is 1 to 2 hours, potentially more. Especially if you have an epidural, it can take longer. So, that's huge. And then the sensations are just different. One thing that always has helped me, and that I always share like in my classes with my clients, because people hear that time frame and they're like, I'm going to be pushing for potentially 2 hours. It's like you're not pushing the whole entire 2 hours.
Right.
I think TV makes it feel that way. They think that I'm just going to be pushing for hours and hours and hours, but I'm like, you're only pushing with your contractions. And a lot of times with pushing, the contractions actually space out a little bit more. They're not as close together as maybe they were in transition. And so I'm like, on average, if they're 3, 4, 5 minutes apart, like you're only pushing like 12 to 20 times in an hour, like for 12 to 20 contractions, and you're pushing multiple times during each contraction, but like you get a break between each one, and you can use those breaks to get water, nice, slow, long, deep breaths, and relax and rest. So I think that is something that really we have to remember, that is like, I get a break. I'm not just pushing for hours at a time without stopping.
I've had clients full on start snoring in between. Yep. Like they completely pass out for 3 minutes in between those contractions. And it's phenomenal to me every time.
Yeah. And if you can create that environment, turn the lights down, make it really nice and calm where they can do that. I've seen that too. Like, it's really awesome. Our bodies are really smart and can rest when we need them to rest. So what did your contractions feel like when you were pushing?
That's a good question.
That's a hard
what
question.
did they feel like? Tell me, Holly. I don't know.
I just think, like, to me, the intensity kind of changed for mine. Yeah. Like, I felt like I wasn't focused so much on these contractions anymore. Because a lot of people say that their contractions with pushing feel different, especially if they're unmedicated. And so I think it's because the focus changes from, like your abdomen and your stomach and the contractions there to now your focus kind of changes.
Yeah, I agree with that. Now that you're saying that, I'm like, yeah, I didn't feel as much intensity like in my abdomen and where I had been, for all during labor. And I think also a lot comes with like your headspace, like, baby is coming close, you're pushing. So yeah. I think a lot of that has to do with like the excitement and the energy, and it's just like a different experience than what you've been doing all throughout early and active labor.
Yeah, I think, memory is so funny, right? Like how did these feel? And I want to say that for me, when it came time to pushing, the difference in pressure, instead of being just like all over, like I could really tell that the contractions were focusing downwards. And it's so hard to describe that in classes or to my clients, that it changes. And it's not just like all over pain, horribleness, like there's a direction to it. And I think being able to move with that, and this goes with the fact that I liked pushing. And so having that direction and being able to push towards it made it feel so different than just labor contractions.
That makes sense to me. Yeah. Did you guys have like a really strong urge to push?
Yes.
Yes.
I think that
that's
comes with
so
like
interesting because it's another thing where there's a huge range there. Because I've had clients be 10 centimeters and they don't feel anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a client who was like complete and she went and took a nap with her husband.
That's one way to do it.
Yeah.
I like that.
And then they were like, okay, like we might want to start, I mean, that was part of her like laboring down and just that time, but it was amazing to me. I was like, really? Like, this isn't just happening? And yeah, she just kind of took a nap and rested. And then it was perfect for her to rejuvenate and get ready for that pushing phase. So yeah, pretty incredible.
Yeah. One of my very first clients, like she was complete. She'd gone through transition and then her contractions just really spaced out again. And she was just hanging out with her husband, swaying. And she's like, I feel a lot of pressure. And I'm like, the question, all the time or just during the contraction? She's like, all the time. I was like, do you feel like you need to push? Like, do I need to go run and get a nurse, the midwife? What's happening? And she's like, no, it's just pressure. And I'm like, okay. So, I mean, I went out to the nurse's station and I let them know, but they were like, oh, okay, when the midwife gets here, we'll casually come in. And I was like, okay.
Yeah.
But she also pushed for a long time. She pushed for 4 hours.
Wow.
So I have found that my clients who are exceptionally fit, like I've had a bodybuilder who was a client. This client, she did horseback riding all the time. And so what I found out later was that a lot of women who have really, really strong pelvic floors, they actually can't relax the pelvic floor enough.
Interesting.
So that was something that she actively practiced for baby number 2. And that one was super fast. Was something's happening. I think baby's coming. And the midwife was like, okay, well, I'll check. And baby's head was coming. Like it was that
was right there.
Wild of a difference.
Yeah. Wow. Well, and I think that brings up a really great point because I've heard things like that before too. Like if you are super, super active, and do like horseback riding, I've heard like ballet, like so many different like sports and things like that you do have to focus on that relaxation. And I think that's a good point, like of seeing like a pelvic floor physical therapist, because most people think that they're only for like if your pelvic floor is too loose and you need to tighten it and work on those things, but it can be for the opposite too. So yeah, I've heard things like that before too. So what was I was just thinking of something, but I forgot. Okay. What about push or positions? Like what positions did you guys push in?
My first one, I was on my back. I don't know why. Maybe it was just comfortable for me. I was with the midwife, unmedicated. And so that was my first one. My second one, and my third, I was in the same position. I think it's just a good position for me. Hands, I was on my knees with my arms over the back end of the hospital bed. And that's baby just comes real fast for me when I'm in that position, just kind of opening my pelvis and all of that. Yeah, it's a good position for me. So I progressed really quickly in that position for number 2, and they actually made me flip over on my back, which I didn't love. And then my third, they let me stay in that position and I just pushed baby out.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
My first, I was sidelined. And it's funny, my mom told me this afterward because I was unaware because pushing a baby. She said that at one point, one of the nurses was trying to get me to roll over onto my back, but that the OB, who I had not been a huge fan of, because he was the on-call OB, he was not my OB, and so I was a little annoyed. But he was like, no, she's fine. She's just fine.
Oh,
and I was
awesome.
like, oh, well, that's lovely.
Yeah.
So sideline, my second and third were on hands and knees at home. And then number 4, I was kind of sitting, kind of reclined. She was coming very fast, so I was not really thinking about positions or anything.
Mm-hmm.
And then the 5th, I was completely upright in like a throne, seated upright position, until she got stuck and shoulder dystocia. And then they pulled that CPR lever on the bed, and I was flat on my back.
Yeah. Yep.
For medical reasons.
Right. Yep.
But by far, I loved hands and knees, and I loved being upright.
Mm-hmm. And like when you talk to a lot of women, that's what they say. Even those that have an epidural, like it kind of depends on how you react to an epidural or how numb you are. But like I've helped clients squat, get on hands and knees, I do all sorts of things with an epidural still. And there are just so many different positions out there that like most people are like, yeah, I just want to get off my back. And yeah, for me, with my first, I started off hands and knees, kind of the same as you, Megan, like leaning over the back of the hospital bed. I feel like with my first, I just kind of felt like I didn't know what I was doing though. Like it can take a bit to figure out like how to push and that kind of stuff. But then I switched to on my side, and then I'm having to like think back. My second one, I was on my side as well. But she came super, super fast. And so I remember the midwife telling me to stop pushing. And then my third, that was my water birth at home. And so I was sitting up in the tub. And then my fourth, I was standing. So kind of all over the place. My fourth one surprised us though, because I wasn't planning to have him standing up. I was planning to, what happened? They broke my water because I was just done. And I just was like, just do it. And then I was going to flip over onto my back because he was posterior and my back was killing me. So I was like, I'll stand up and then I'll hop on the bed and get on hands and knees. And I never got back on the bed, hands and knees. I stood up and I just felt him drop and rotate, and he just came out.
Oh my word.
So it was kind of crazy. But yeah, I think using a variety of different positions and stuff that's super helpful, especially like if you're having a hard time figuring out exactly what you're doing, and you might progress in different positions better than in others. But it's hard in hospitals where it's just standard is to just put you on your back. And that's what they're used to. That's what, that's just their standard procedure. I think that's a really good conversation to have with your provider before the birth of, are you good with me being in different positions and using different things? I find that nurses tend to be more open to using different positions before the OB or the midwife comes in, but then it's like the second that doctor comes in, okay, we need you to roll, flip over and be on your back. And gosh, I've seen that one too many times where I'm just like, if you don't want to move, you do not have to. Like I had a doctor once say that he couldn't catch a mom who was on hands and knees. And I'm like, this baby is right here. It's like, it's her second baby. It's not like it's her first, like, just super frustrating.
What's wrong with you? Can you not bend over? Like what is your physical limitation that's preventing you from being able to catch this baby?
Right. And that's the thing, is it's not that they can't, it's that they won't or don't want to for whatever reason.
Exactly.
Yeah. I had one mom though, who I wasn't even at my favorite hospital. But she was doing great and she pushed in all sorts of different positions and she was on her hands and knees. And I totally expected the OB to walk in and be like, all right, I need you to flip over. And funny enough, my client asked, she was like, do you need me to flip over? And I was like, why would you say something like that? Like, I didn't say anything about that. I was like, Why would you ask that? But luckily the OB was like, no, you're great. You stay here. You're doing great. And it was awesome. But I just kind of laughed. I was like, why would you ask that?
Because it's so common. That's why people just see
Right.
it in the movies and on TV and they're like, well, that's how it's done.
Mhm.
So oftentimes I think just in the back of their mind, they're like, oh, well, now I need to
Right.
flip over.
Mhm. Yep. But yeah, so one of my favorite ways is to use a rebozo, like wrap a rebozo around something and kind of do that like tug of war. That's like my absolute favorite. I've seen it help moms progress so quickly that they're actually like, oh, let's like stop and get your provider in here before you keep pushing. So
Yeah,
that's one of my favorites.
I feel like that's the one way I use my rebozo almost the most when I'm helping clients.
Yeah,
it's a good one.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
Let's see. Let's talk about different things that can affect pushing. We've kind of already talked about like, you know, you might be pushing longer if you're medicated, and it can be a little bit harder to get into different positions, but it's totally possible if you have the right kind of support. But what are some other things that you guys can think of that can affect pushing?
Position.
Yeah.
Position of the baby, I feel like, is like the biggest thing. And it's interesting when you're not the laboring person and you see like, okay, well, like just looking at, you know, how labor is progressing and all these things, like baby might be in a little bit of an odd position. And then you can tell as soon as baby's like, if they've gotten into a good position, and then things progress pretty rapidly after that. So yeah, I feel like position makes a big difference.
Yeah. I know we've talked a lot about mom's position, but baby's position is huge. So I'm glad you said that. Yep. I had a client once who baby came out. I was like, oh, that's totally where baby position was on the side of their head. Like they kind of had their cone head was off to the side. And I was like, oh man, I'm glad we got that baby to move.
Yeah.
Poor baby.
Yeah.
Poor mom, poor baby, poor everybody.
Yeah. It was a long pushing. It was.
Yeah. Sometimes the size of the baby can affect the pushing. We talk all the time about how your body's not going to grow a baby that's too big for you to push out, but it can still affect how long it takes you to push that baby out. But I've seen itty bitty babies take forever and a day to make their way. And I don't know what the physics are involved with that. Like, how does a 5.5-pound baby take 4 hours?
Yep.
Right. It's just wild to me. And you know, my 9-pounder who came out in under 20. So it's wild. But sometimes, depending on your own body mechanics, maybe the shape of your pelvis means that the size of the baby does matter.
And I think that that's when like your positioning helps so much too. I think there's also like we hear of like the big, you know, I'm going to have a big baby and I'm not going to be able to push it out. And I also feel like while big babies might, I'm not going to say big, I'll say bigger babies, not that they're big. I've seen an 11 and 12 pound baby be born vaginally with no issue. So like big to me, I'm kind of like, I don't know. I don't really think they're big until they're like 10 pounds. But I find that like, and they're worried that they're going to tear more if they have a bigger baby. But I've actually seen the opposite where they tear more when it's a small baby, because if those smaller babies just kind of come shooting out versus when you've got a little bit of a bigger baby, it may take a little bit longer to push them out, but that also gives like your perineum a little bit more chance to stretch. And so then you actually might have less tearing. And I'm like, their cheeks, they will squish, you know. Yeah. I'm like, they just have some rolls on them. It's okay. Yeah. Because I think that's definitely something that our society is like, they're all afraid of this, having this big baby. But I'm like, I've seen little babies be just as difficult with pushing and stuff too. So I'm glad you said that.
Yeah, I always say that fat is squishy. Like there's nothing wrong with some fat. It's just squishy.
Yep. I feel like I even remember there were studies. I'll have to go in and look, but there was even some studies that like bigger babies actually do, but they can like control their temperature better. They generally eat better. You know, so like there can actually be benefits to having a baby with a few rolls on them. Like none of mine did. I always have little skinny babies and they stay that way for a long time, but there can actually be some benefits to it. Okay, I want well, do you guys have anything to add about that before we move on?
We've talked a lot about like the mom's position and like the shape of the pelvis. We've talked a little bit about that. So all of those things can affect pushing as well. And but there are things that we like can't know or foresee as well. So and that can, I mean, it can be a broad range of different things. And we talk a lot about those in our class as well.
Yeah. I want to talk about like there's all these different kind of ideas out there about how to push. And some people have very strong opinions about them. I'm more of a whatever works for this mom type of person. So because there's kind of like both ends of the spectrum of like the coach pushing, you know, where they're counting, which, you know, is definitely not my favorite, but I've also worked with clients where that really helped them. Versus the whole like breathe your baby out and you hardly push at all. You know, and then I just kind of use the term like mother directed pushing, like listen to your body, push when it tells you to push, you know, things like that. I don't know. What have you guys seen? What do you feel like has worked well with your clients and stuff?
I feel like the directed pushing comes in a lot more with medicated birth. Because it is harder to feel what your body's doing. And so a lot of times your provider is going to do that on purpose because they're trying to help you throughout that process, because you might not be able to feel the urge to push. And like you're saying, like, I don't know. I don't know that I've ever seen that with somebody who is unmedicated. Have you?
The coach pushing?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it. Again, I think it just goes back to like it's the hospital, it's what they do, it's what they're used to. And so for my clients who would prefer to not have that, I actually recommend they put it on their birth plan.
Yeah, that's good.
And pretty much, you know, say I would prefer to not have the coaching, you know, and because I'm like, if we need it, then we need it, and we can pull that tool out later. But if you would prefer not to have it, then let's not have it.
Yeah. So. Absolutely. Yeah. I don't know. I like the idea of like breathing baby out in that. I think I like it because my babies do come fast. And so for me, like I need to focus on that breath and that breathing and that concentration on almost slowing things down a little bit. So that for me personally has worked. But I feel like generally most of my clients are just kind of doing that mother directed. They're going to feel it. And like if they need some direction from their OB or midwife, like, hey, let's, you know, pant through this one. Let's slow things down a little bit. That seems to be like probably the most common that I see.
Yeah. I think I've talked to many midwives about this because I think there's a lot of like social media accounts and things like that you know, they talk about breathing the baby out. And so they get this idea that it's just going to be easy, pushing's not going to be much effort, and things like that. Like, and some moms can do that, but then midwives, I've seen them kind of get frustrated when they're like, okay, I need you to actually like push, like I need you to do something. We need to move this baby down. And And so I think it's like, that's why I love talking about all of it, is like, you may be able to do that.
Yeah.
But you may actually have to push. And I think some people can be surprised by the intensity of pushing and by how much work they have to actually do.
Yeah.
So I know one midwife, she was like, it's like written in her things, like they're one of their visits to like specifically talk about pushing, just to kind of be like, you may be able to just not have to do much work, but you might have to also do some work.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it just comes down to like the variations of normal, and like if you are a really fast baby, like there's different techniques that can work for you, or if things are taking a little bit longer, like there's different things that are going to work or work better. So I think it just all depends on like how the labor is progressing and how birth is progressing. So
yeah, I think that just goes back to like talking to your care provider during your pregnancy, like before the birth, like, and seeing how they manage pushing. And are they good with you trying different positions or trying different just different things, because it's one of those things where it's not like an all or nothing, like you're stuck doing it this one way. You can change things up. So
I feel like I've seen a trend, and it's more in like hospitals where baby is, we're getting to the pushing stage, mom's in her favorite position, and the whole staff team comes in and starts like, you can do this, cheering. And I almost want to be like, silence everybody, like let us just be in this moment, let her like relax if she needs to. But it's almost like overwhelming for me as a doula. And I kind of want to excuse everybody, like, you all don't need to be here for this. Come back when we're further along, because it's a little bit can be overwhelming. Have you noticed that at all?
oh yeah, oh totally.
Yeah. And like the mentality between like, or seeing the difference between, I know, right? Stop doing that. I even had a client, she was like, that nurse came in and she was like being way too energetic. I was like, I know. She was being a little bit crazy. So yeah. Maybe that's something you can talk to your care provider too. Like, Jesse, I want things to be a little bit more relaxed during this phase, because it is a common thing to see, especially in a hospital setting.
Yeah. I've had a few clients say they've put on their birth plan, they're like, that we want to have as minimal amount of people as possible. They're like, I understand that you've got your policies and people need to come in and stuff, but like, let's keep it to a minimum. Because sometimes I feel like, especially if there's not many other moms in labor on the labor and delivery floor that day or that night, that I feel like more people come in because they're bored and they want to see a birth.
They want to see it happen.
So I don't know. That's just kind of what I've seen. So I've had some clients write that, because they're just like, I don't want a bajillion people in here. And I'm like, I don't blame you.
Yeah. Yeah. I read something the other day, was talking about, I think it was from Reclaiming Childbirth as a Rite of Passage. It was talking about how like there's a spotlight on your vagina when you're like pushing, because everyone's like no longer focusing on the contractions, they're focusing on your vagina, because that's where baby's coming. And so it can be like stage fright, like, holy moly, there's like a group of people staring at this, and it just feels very vulnerable, and it can be a lot. So yeah, definitely being able to talk about that beforehand, like, hey, you don't need 10 people in here probably. So
yeah.
Okay. So with my fourth, I was a surrogate, and I was the only person who was in labor on the floor that day, apparently. And so it was months after the fact that they were hanging out. I was getting my baby snuggles, and he was like, how many people were in that room anyway? And so we counted, like we looked back on some photos, and we just looked back and counted on how there were 11 people in that room, not including me.
Oh my goodness.
But they did all ask permission.
Okay.
But they all just really wanted to, and they were like, we've never seen this before. This is so cool. Like, all natural and all of this. And so they asked. It wasn't just like a party. But there were like 6 extra room because they just wanted to be a part of the experience.
Wow.
And I didn't care. That's how I am in labor. I don't care. But yeah, it was a lot of people.
Yeah,
that's a lot of people.
I'm just thinking about like most labor and delivery rooms, and I'm like, where are they standing?
Where are all those people?
Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah, it probably like was the whole like because you were a surrogate and you know, unmedicated and all that stuff. So it probably was an exciting, you know, thing that they wanted to be a part of. So yeah. Okay, let's yeah, I wanted to talk about laboring down. Because I think there's this idea that like once you're 10 centimeters, you have to push. And we kind of mentioned, some people will kind of get that. I've heard it called that rest and be thankful phase, like where you kind of get a period of time where like contractions kind of slow down, you can rest before you start pushing. And then all of a sudden you'll get this big adrenaline rush and be ready to push and get all that energy. But like, you might not feel that urge to push and your body can continue to labor. And so they call it laboring down, and your body can actually push your baby lower and lower. I feel like I see this more and more with if you're medicated, if you do have an epidural, because we're just letting your uterus do the work of pushing baby down. And the goal is to get baby lower so that you're not pushing as long. And I've seen that be really effective for some moms. It really kind of depends on what station your baby's at and things like that. But I think that is such a great way to like reserve energy and things like that. And I think that it should be an option. You know, if they do a vaginal exam and say, hey, you're 10 centimeters, but I'm like, okay, well, what station is the baby at? You know, and can I just, you know, can I have a little bit more time? Like, unless you're like feeling tons and tons of pressure and you want to push, like sometimes laboring down can be great. So I think it's good for moms to know that you don't have to push just because you're 10 centimeters.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I love that because I agree with you. I think I feel like I've seen that a lot with medicated, where they're like, okay, you're 10 centimeters. And then they leave the, provider usually they're like, hey, we'll be back soon. And they kind of just let mom's body do a lot of that work. And then they come back and kind of say, okay, time to get things moving.
Yeah. I had a birth I was at once where my client was unmedicated and a nurse came in and like, so we were pushing and a nurse came in and talked to the midwife and was like, hey, there's another mom down the hall that's 10. And she was like, well, does she have an epidural? And the nurse was like, yes. And the midwife was like, then she'll be fine.
Yeah.
Kind of like she's got some time, whereas this mom's unmedicated. She's actively pushing. She's, so yeah. But there's just so much to know. Like people are just shocked that there's so much to know about pushing, I'm like, here we've almost been talking for an hour about it. Like, and there's still more that we could talk about, but I think that's probably good for today. So yeah, but I think it's definitely a good conversation to have with your provider, find out kind of how they manage pushing, what kind of their philosophies are, what your hospitals, how they kind of handle that, asking them if they have a squat bar or, can we move the bed so that I'm sitting up, or, all those different types of things that are really good for pushing. So, all right. Anything else y'all would add?
No, that was great.
Okay. All right. Thanks for listening, everybody. If you have questions about pushing, send us a message. We'd be happy to answer those. And if you haven't taken a birth boot camp class, that's where we have the most information about pushing. So take a class, highly recommended for that. But yeah, stay tuned for next week and we will see you then. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Birth Boot Camp podcast. We're so grateful to have you as a part of our community. If you enjoyed today's episode and found it valuable, we'd love to hear from you. please take a moment to leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback helps us improve and reach more families on their journey through pregnancy and birth. As a token of our appreciation, we're excited to offer you our exclusive birth plan blueprint. Inside, you'll find expert guidance and a template to help you create a birth plan that reflects your preferences and desires for your birthing experience. Simply click the link below in the episode description to have your blueprint sent right to your inbox. Remember, your birth plan is a powerful tool for communication and advocacy during labor and delivery. Don't miss this opportunity to take control of your birthing experience and advocate for the birth you envision. Thank you again for listening. Be sure to subscribe, and we look forward to sharing more amazing insights and stories with you in our next episode.